Night settled over Calcutta like a heavy, breathless veil. The air was thick with heat and moisture, clinging to the skin as if it refused to let go. From beyond the walls of the convent came the familiar odors of the city, the sour stench of garbage left to rot in the streets, the sharp smoke of cooking fires burning low in the slums, and the distant cries of vendors fading into darkness. Calcutta never truly slept, it only grew quieter in its suffering. Inside the chapel of the Missionaries of Charity, Mother Teresa rose slowly from her knees. The evening prayer had ended, the final Amen still lingering in the air like a fragile thread of sound. The small room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, its flame trembling as though it too felt the weight of the night. Around her, the other sisters moved softly, their footsteps careful, their faces calm with the discipline of long devotion. Yet something was different. As the last sister left the chapel and the wooden door closed, an unusual silence descended, deeper than the silence of empty space. It pressed inward, heavy and watchful. Mother Teresa remained standing, her hands folded at her chest, her eyes fixed on the crucifix above the altar. She had prayed thousands of times in this very room, in this very stillness, but never had the quiet felt so alive.
A sensation stirred within her, an ache that did not belong to the body. It was not hunger for bread or water, nor the exhaustion of long hours spent among the dying. It was a deeper longing, sharp and unsettling, as though a soul somewhere was starving and crying out for mercy. Mother Teresa closed her eyes, breathing slowly, listening not with her ears, but with her heart. She thought of the poor sleeping in the streets beyond the convent walls, of children whose ribs showed through their skin, of mothers who rocked lifeless infants through the night. Yet this feeling was different. It was more focused, more urgent, as if someone unseen was standing just beyond the veil of the world, waiting to be noticed. The oil lamp flickered. Mother Teresa opened her eyes. The shadows along the chapel walls seemed to deepen, stretching unnaturally toward the center of the room. Her heart did not race. Fear did not come. Instead, a profound sorrow filled her, gentle but overwhelming, like the weight of another's grief laid upon her soul. Then, in the silence, a thought formed, not as sound, not as words spoken aloud, but as a clear and undeniable truth whispered into her spirit. Someone is crying, but not with a voice. Mother Teresa bowed her head once more. Whatever was coming, she knew, would not allow her to rest this night. The silence in the chapel deepened, growing so dense it felt as though the air itself had stopped moving. Mother Teresa remained kneeling, her eyes closed, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. Then, without warning, the oil lamp shuddered and dimmed, its flame bending low as if bowing before an unseen presence. She felt it before she saw it. A coldness brushed against her skin, not the chill of night air, but something heavier, laden with sorrow. Slowly she lifted her gaze toward the far corner of the chapel, where the shadows gathered unnaturally thick. From that darkness, a figure began to take shape. It was the form of a man, thin to the point of being almost hollow. His body appeared fragile, wrapped in torn, filthy clothing that hung loosely from his frame. His face was gaunt, his cheeks sunken deep, and his eyes, wide and trembling, held a fear so raw it seemed frozen within them. He looked like one of the countless beggars Mother Teresa had seen in the streets of Calcutta, yet there was something unmistakably different about him. He did not breathe. The figure stepped forward, his movements hesitant, as though unsure he was allowed to exist. Mother Teresa felt no terror, only an immense compassion rising in her chest. She understood, without being told, that this was a soul, one that did not belong to the living world. "I am a father," the soul said, his voice thin and strained, like wind passing through broken walls. "I died of hunger." The words struck her like a quiet blow. Hunger, she knew, could kill slowly, cruelly. She had held too many bodies wasted by it, whispered prayers over too many who had died unseen and unloved. Yet this soul did not speak of his own pain. His eyes shifted, filled with anguish far greater than fear for himself. "My wife, my children," he continued, his voice quivering, "they are still alive." Mother Teresa leaned forward slightly, her heart tightening. "What do you ask of me?" she whispered. The soul's form flickered, as though time itself pressed upon him. "I do not ask for rest. I do not ask for heaven. I ask for them." He raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the darkness beyond the convent walls. Desperation poured from him like a silent cry. "If you do not go," the soul said, his voice breaking, "they will die before the next sunrise." The lamp flickered again. The weight of the words settled heavily in the chapel, drawing a sharp line between this moment and all that had come before. Mother Teresa knew then that the night was no longer hers to endure in prayer alone. Time itself had begun to run out. The soul did not move closer, yet the space between worlds seemed to thin. The walls of the chapel faded, their solid edges dissolving like mist under the morning sun. Mother Teresa felt the ground beneath her feet steady, even as everything around her began to change. Before her eyes, the city revealed itself, not as it appeared by day, but as it existed in its deepest wounds. She saw narrow alleyways twisting like veins through the slums, so tight that light barely reached the ground. Mud clung to bare feet, filth pooled in shallow gutters. The air was thick with decay and despair. Rusted tin roofs sagged under years of neglect, their jagged edges rattling faintly in a hot, unseen wind. Each structure leaned against the next, as if the entire slum would collapse should one wall finally give way. Then the vision drew her closer. At the end of one alley stood a hut scarcely worthy of the name. Its walls were patched together from scraps of metal and broken wood, its roof bowed inward, threatening to fall at any moment. Darkness clung to it, heavier than the night itself. Inside, Mother Teresa's breath caught. A woman lay on the dirt floor, her body frail and motionless. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, her lips cracked with thirst. Each shallow breath seemed like an effort she might not manage again. Near her, two small children lay side by side, their limbs thin and still, their chests rising so faintly it was almost impossible to tell if they were alive at all. Hunger had drained the color from their faces, leaving them pale and hollow, like shadows of children rather than children themselves. Mother Teresa felt her heart break in silence. The scene pulsed with urgency, as though time itself were tightening its grip. The smell of sickness and starvation seemed to reach her, even within the vision. She wanted to reach out, to lift the children, to call for help, but she could only watch. Beside her, the soul appeared again, no longer trembling, but heavy with sorrow. His voice came not from his lips, but from somewhere deeper, echoing directly into her spirit. "They are invisible to the world," he whispered. Mother Teresa felt tears sting her eyes, but not to God. The vision began to fade, the alleyways retreating into darkness, the fragile hut dissolving into shadow, yet the images burned themselves into her heart, sharp and unforgettable. When the chapel returned around her, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt urgent. She understood now. The path had been shown, the suffering had been revealed, and what she did next would decide whether 3 fragile lives would see the light of another day. The chapel returned to its familiar stillness, yet nothing felt the same. Mother Teresa remained motionless, the vision still burning behind her eyes. The cries she had not heard echoed louder now than any sound. Slowly, doubt crept in, not as fear, but as a quiet question pressing against her faith. Was this a true calling or a test? She had learned long ago to distrust impulses born of emotion. Faith, she believed, required obedience, not imagination. Visions could mislead, feelings could deceive. And yet, what she had seen bore the unmistakable weight of truth. The suffering was too precise, too real, too urgent to be dismissed as a wandering thought born of exhaustion. Mother Teresa closed her eyes and pressed her forehead lightly against the cool wood of the pew. In the silence, another memory rose within her, the moment years before when God had spoken to her heart, calling her away from the safety of the convent and into the streets. It had been a command wrapped in love, clear and demanding all at once. A call within a call. She had obeyed then, stepping into the unknown with nothing but trust. And because she had gone, countless lives had been touched. The poorest of the poor had found dignity, care, and love. Now the same question stood before her again, not spoken aloud, but heavy with consequence. Will you go? Outside, the city groaned in the darkness. Night in the slums was not merely quiet, it was dangerous. Gangs roamed freely, disease spread unseen. Even the sisters did not leave the convent after sunset unless absolutely necessary. To go now would be to place herself and anyone who followed in real danger. Mother Teresa rose to her feet. She moved quickly through the corridor, her sandals barely making a sound against the stone floor. In the small dormitory, she stopped beside the bed of a young sister, barely more than a girl, her face still marked by the softness of youth. "Come with me," Mother Teresa said gently. The young nun sat up, confusion flashing across her face. "Mother, it's the middle of the night." "There is a family," Mother Teresa replied. "They are starving." For a moment the girl hesitated. Fear flickered in her eyes, of the dark streets, of what they might find, of what could happen to them. The silence stretched, fragile and uncertain. Then she swung her feet to the floor and nodded. "I will come." Mother Teresa felt no relief, only resolve. Doubt, she knew, was a luxury the poor could not afford. While questions waited for answers, children starved. Wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders, she stepped toward the door. If the vision had been a test, she would answer it the only way she knew how, not with hesitation, but with action. And with that choice, the night itself seemed to hold its breath. The convent gates closed softly behind them, and the night of Calcutta swallowed them whole. Darkness pressed in from every side, thick and suffocating, broken only by distant fires flickering like dying stars. The air was heavy with heat and decay, carrying the sour stench of refuse and the unmistakable odor of death that lingered where sickness and hunger ruled. They walked in silence. With each step deeper into the slums, the streets narrowed, twisting into crooked passageways barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. Shadows clung to the walls, shifting as if alive. Somewhere in the darkness, dogs barked sharply, their cries echoing off the tin and brick like warnings. The sound made the young nun's breath quicken, though she said nothing. Figures stirred along the edges of the alleys. Men and women watched from doorways and broken shelters, their eyes catching faint light before vanishing again. To them, the two sisters must have looked unreal, white habits gliding through filth and shadow, like spirits wandering where they did not belong. No one spoke, no one followed. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell became. Rotting waste, stagnant water, human suffering left too long unattended. Mother Teresa felt it settle in her lungs, but she did not slow. Her hand tightened around her rosary, each bead a quiet act of defiance against the darkness. Then, just ahead, something shifted. A shape appeared at the mouth of a narrow alley, a fleeting figure, thin and pale, almost transparent. The soul. He did not turn, did not speak. He simply moved forward, dissolving into shadow, then appearing again a few steps farther on. A silent guide. Mother Teresa followed without hesitation. The young nun saw it too. She gasped softly but kept walking, her fear now bound to something greater than herself. The alleys grew tighter, the night heavier, as if they were descending into the very heart of the city's suffering. This was no longer a journey through streets and slums. It was a passage into a living maze of despair, one that had swallowed countless lives. And somewhere at its center, time was running out. The alley ended abruptly, as though the city itself refused to go any farther. Before them stood the hut from the vision, smaller than memory, more fragile than fear. Its walls were a patchwork of rusted tin and splintered wood, bowed inward by time and neglect. The roof sagged dangerously, held together by rope and desperation. It looked less like a shelter and more like something forgotten by the world. Mother Teresa stopped. The soul appeared once more beside the hut, his form barely visible now, fading at the edges. He lowered his head in silent urgency, then vanished. Mother Teresa pushed aside the hanging scrap of cloth that served as a door. Inside, the darkness was thick and suffocating. The smell struck first, stale air, sickness, and the hollow scent of hunger that lingered where food had long been absent. As her eyes adjusted, the shapes on the dirt floor came into focus, and her heart clenched. A woman lay motionless near the wall. Her body was thin beyond reason, her skin drawn tight over bone. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, each one seeming uncertain of returning. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, dull and unfocused, then closed again, as if even sight required more strength than she possessed. Beside her lay two children. They were frighteningly still. Their limbs were thin, their faces pale and sunken. Mother Teresa knelt quickly, placing her fingers gently against one child's neck. A pulse, weak, fragile, but there. The other child's breathing was barely visible, a faint movement beneath ribs that pressed against the skin. There was nothing else in the hut. No bowl, no grain, no pot of water cooling in the corner. Only emptiness, of food, of strength, of time. The young nun swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears she dared not let fall. They had arrived at the edge of life itself. Mother Teresa closed her eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer of gratitude and sorrow. A moment later, and it would have been too late. Here, in this forgotten hut, hope had been measured in minutes. And those minutes were nearly gone. Mother Teresa did not hesitate. From beneath her shawl, she drew out the small bundle she had brought with her, what little food remained from the convent's supplies. It was meant to last her through the next day.
Without a word, she knelt and broke the bread into careful portions, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. She fed the children first. Placing small pieces gently against their lips, she waited, praying they would have the strength to swallow. One child stirred faintly, a soft sound escaping his throat. The other did not move at all. The young nun's breath caught, her fear rising like a tide. She glanced at Mother Teresa, her eyes silently asking the question neither dared to speak. Had they come too late? Mother Teresa turned her attention to the mother. She dipped her fingers into the last drops of water she carried, moistening the woman's cracked lips. "Jesus is with you," she whispered, though no sign came in response. The hut remained still, unmoved by their presence. They prayed, not loudly, not desperately, but with the quiet surrender of those who had given everything they had to give. There was no sudden light, no dramatic change. The children did not rise. The mother did not speak. The silence pressed in harder than before, and doubt brushed dangerously close. Then Mother Teresa sensed it. She looked up to see the soul of the Father kneeling near the doorway. His form was clearer now, his face softened by something that had not been there before. Gratitude. He bowed low, his head touching the dirt floor, his hands folded as if in prayer. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice no longer trembling. "You have chosen love." Mother Teresa felt tears gather in her eyes, though her face remained calm. She understood then that miracles did not begin with thunder or light, but with sacrifice, offered freely, without promise of reward. She had given her last bread, and in that offering, something unseen had already begun to move.
The hut remained quiet, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty, it felt expectant. Mother Teresa was still kneeling when she heard it, a faint sound, barely more than a breath drawn too deeply. One of the children stirred, his fingers twitched, then curled weakly around the edge of her sleeve. The young nun gasped softly as the child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. "He's waking," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Moments later, the mother moved. Her hand, thin and trembling, reached out and closed gently around Mother Teresa's fingers. It was a small gesture, fragile and uncertain, but it carried the weight of 1,000 prayers. The woman's lips parted, though no words came. Her eyes filled with tears instead. Mother Teresa squeezed her hand, her own tears finally falling freely. She did not speak. She only stayed. Then a sound came from outside. Footsteps. A man's voice murmured hesitantly, followed by the rustle of movement at the hut's entrance. A neighbor stood there, holding a small sack of rice against his chest. His eyes darted nervously between the sisters and the figures on the floor. "I don't know why. I woke up and felt I had to bring this." Before Mother Teresa could respond, another figure appeared, a woman carrying a dented container filled with clean water. She placed it down without explanation, her face pale with urgency. More footsteps followed, more whispers. The narrow alley seemed to breathe as people emerged from the darkness, each bringing something small, food, water, cloth, drawn by a call they could not name. Mother Teresa bowed her head in silent gratitude. No angel had descended, no voice had thundered from heaven. The miracle came instead through human hands, awakened by compassion. Love, once offered without reserve, had begun to multiply. In that fragile hut, surrounded by poverty and darkness, it became clear. Love, when given fully, was enough to change everything. As dawn drew closer, a pale gray light began to seep into the slum, softening the edges of the night. Inside the hut,
The air felt lighter, as though a long-held breath had finally been released. The children slept now, not the still, frightening sleep of starvation, but the deep, uneven rest of bodies slowly returning to life. The mother's breathing had steadied, her hand still wrapped weakly around Mother Teresa's fingers. It was then that Mother Teresa sensed him. She lifted her gaze toward the corner of the hut where shadows had once gathered heavily. A familiar presence emerged, but it was no longer the broken figure that had first appeared in the chapel. The soul of the Father stood before her, transformed. His clothing was no longer torn or filthy. The gaunt hollowness had vanished from his face. He appeared whole, dignified, almost radiant. A gentle light surrounded him, not harsh or blinding, but warm, like the glow of early morning. Where fear had once filled his eyes, there was now peace. He looked at his family, sleeping safely on the dirt floor, and something like wonder crossed his face. Slowly he knelt, pressing his hands together in a gesture of reverence and gratitude. His gaze returned to Mother Teresa, and he smiled. It was a simple smile, quiet and deeply human, the kind born not of relief alone, but of love fulfilled. "Now I can rest," he said softly. The words carried no sorrow, no regret, only release. Mother Teresa felt tears trace a warm path down her cheeks. She bowed her head slightly, not in farewell, but in acknowledgment of a soul finally unburdened. She understood that his suffering had never been for himself. It had been bound entirely to the fate of those he loved. The light around him brightened, filling the small hut with a gentle glow that did not cast shadows. For a brief moment, the poverty, the filth, the broken walls seemed to fall away, replaced by a stillness that felt holy. Then, slowly, the light faded. The soul dissolved into the air, not vanishing abruptly, but melting into peace, like mist lifted by the rising sun. When he was gone, nothing remained of his presence, except the calm that settled in his wake. Mother Teresa closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. The soul had found rest, and in saving the living, the dead had been freed. Morning arrived quietly, as if unwilling to disturb what had taken place in the night. Pale sunlight crept into the narrow alley, glinting off rusted tin roofs and damp stone. Inside the hut, the family still lived. The children breathed steadily now, their faces no longer hollow with hunger. The mother stirred, her eyes opening with fragile awareness. Word spread without words. Neighbors whispered to one another as they passed. Someone had nearly died. Someone had been saved. By mid-morning, people began to come, one by one, then in small groups. A handful of rice, a piece of fruit, a cup of clean water. No one asked why. No one took credit. The alley filled with quiet movement, with small acts of kindness multiplying like light at dawn. Mother Teresa watched in silence. She understood then that the miracle had not ended in that hut. It had only begun. One family had been saved, and in saving them, an entire slum had remembered how to love.
There were no reporters waiting in the alley. No cameras captured the fragile smiles or the quiet tears. No headlines announced what had happened in the night. The world did not notice, but heaven did. Every step taken in faith, every piece of bread shared, every life preserved was written where no human record could fade. As Mother Teresa prepared to leave, she looked once more at the narrow alley, now alive with compassion. "The greatest poverty," she said softly, "is not hunger. It is being unloved." And in that forgotten corner of Calcutta, Love had spoken louder than any news ever could.
If you had been there that night, in the heat, the darkness, the fear, would you have gone? If a quiet voice had whispered that lives depended on your answer, would you have believed? Most miracles do not ask to be witnessed, they ask to be chosen. Tonight, somewhere in the world, a soul is crying without a voice. A family waits, unseen and forgotten. May we have the courage to listen. May we have the faith to act. And may God remember the poor, whom the world too often forgets.